Something wasn't adding up in that room, and everybody could feel it. Dana White walked into that studio with a grin on his face, the kind of grin that only shows up when he's about to change the entire conversation around a sport. He sat down, the cameras rolled, and within seconds, the fight world stopped scrolling, stopped arguing, stopped doing anything else. Because when Dana White smiles like that, something big is coming. And this time, he wasn't just dropping one piece of news. He was dropping an avalanche. Let's rewind for a second and set the scene, because to understand how wild this moment really is, you need to picture where the UFC has been and where it's about to go. For years, one city sat quietly on the sidelines, watching other places host the biggest nights in fighting. Philadelphia, a city that loves its sports with a kind of fierce, loud passion, a city that boos its own team at a parade if they're not playing hard enough, had not seen a numbered UFC event in 15 years. 15 years. Think about that. An entire generation of fight fans grew up in that city without ever getting a true, marquee night of championship violence in their backyard. The last time it happened was back in 2011, when Rashad Evans and Tito Ortiz threw down in front of a Philly crowd. Since then, nothing. One quiet fight night back in 2019 was the closest thing the city got, and even that felt like a consolation prize. So when Dana White sat down next to the governor of Pennsylvania himself, on a show hosted by a guy who grew up in that very state, you knew this wasn't going to be small news. This was a homecoming. This was the UFC finally saying, "We're coming back, and we're not messing around." And they weren't. Because what came out of Dana White's mouth next sent shockwaves through the entire combat sports world. August 15th, Xfinity Mobile Arena. UFC 330. And not just any card. 2 championship fights. 2 belts on the line. In a city that hadn't tasted UFC gold in a decade and a half. Picture this. The lights dim. The crowd in Philadelphia, a crowd known for being brutally honest, unapologetically loud, and starving for something real, rises to its feet. And out walks the most dangerous man in the sport right now. Islam Makhachev. If you don't know his story yet, buckle up, because it's one of the most terrifying tales in modern MMA. This is a man who hasn't lost a single fight since 2015. Think about how long ago that is. Entire UFC careers have started and ended since Makhachev's last loss. He built his legacy at lightweight, became a champion there, dominated everyone put in front of him, and then did something almost unthinkable. He walked away from that throne, moved up in weight, and went hunting for a brand new one. At UFC 322, back in November, he stepped into the cage with Jack Della Maddalena, the reigning welterweight king, a bigger, heavier man in a division that wasn't supposed to belong to Makhachev. And he took it anyway. A clean, methodical decision win that announced to the entire world that this man doesn't just win fights, he solves them, like puzzles, piece by piece, until there's no way out for his opponent. Now, for the first time since claiming that new throne, Makhachev has to defend it. And the man Dana White has lined up for him isn't some soft, easy voluntary defense. It's a genuine nightmare matchup. Ian Machado Gary, an Irish fighter with swagger, sharp hands, and a record that reads 17 wins, and just a single loss, a loss that came against one of the scariest strikers walking the planet. Gary has been climbing, fight after fight, taking down former champions, taking down rising stars, building a case that he deserves exactly this moment. And now he has it. The pound-for-pound best fighter alive, standing across the cage from a hungry challenger with something to prove, in a city that hasn't seen championship gold defended in 15 years. That alone would have been enough to break the internet. But Dana White wasn't finished. He turned around and delivered a second gut punch of news. A co-main event that also carries a championship. Mackenzie Dern, the women's strawweight champion, a fighter with a black belt so dangerous that grappling with her is basically inviting disaster, will step in against Jillian Robertson, a Canadian fighter riding a 5-fight win streak, and holding one of the most feared submission resumes in the entire women's division. 2 belts. 1 night. 1 city that waited 15 long years for this exact moment. But here's where the story takes a turn, because building a card like this is never simple. Behind the scenes, while fans were still celebrating the announcement, cracks were already starting to form. One of the matchups being whispered about for that Philadelphia card involved 2 rising middleweight killers, Caio Borralho and Joe Pyfer. Borralho, a relentless, suffocating grappler with real championship aspirations, was supposed to be part of building out this historic night. But then, out of nowhere, bad news landed like a punch nobody saw coming. Borralho stepped forward and revealed the truth himself. A rib injury, and not a minor one. The kind of injury doctors don't take lightly. He explained that the bones simply hadn't healed the way it needed to, and worse, the displacement was dangerous enough that it risked puncturing his lung. Let that sink in for a second. This wasn't a bruised rib or a tough guy pushing through pain. This was a fighter one wrong movement away from a genuinely life-threatening situation. Surgery became the only option, and just like that, he was pulled from any plans for UFC 330. It's a brutal reminder of what these athletes risk every single time they step inside that cage, and how quickly a dream matchup can vanish because of the fragile, unforgiving nature of the human body. But the UFC doesn't stop building just because one piece falls out of place. As the card kept forming, more names started getting locked in. Edson Barboza, a veteran with knockout power that still makes fans hold their breath, was added against a hard-hitting Argentine, Esteban Ribovics. Vicente Luque, a fighter who has already survived a career-threatening medical scare of his own years ago, one that required special clearance just to get back into the cage, was added to fight Tresean Gore, a young underdog looking for the signature win of his career. And a red-hot welterweight named Miktibek Oralbai, a man riding a serious winning streak with brutal finishes on his record, was added to test himself against the tough, durable Jeremiah Wells. Piece by piece, Philadelphia's long-awaited return card was taking shape into something that felt less like a regular fight night and more like a full-blown spectacle. And just when it seemed like the news cycle couldn't get any louder, Dana White reminded everyone why he's the master of stealing headlines. Because in that same stretch of jaw-dropping announcements, he confirmed something fans have been begging for since the summer of 2021. Conor McGregor was coming back. Yes, that Conor McGregor. The most famous fighter the sport has ever produced. A man who hadn't competed since suffering a horrific broken leg in front of a stunned crowd years earlier. For a long time, fans wondered if that moment was the final chapter of his story inside the octagon. Some doubted he'd ever return. Others feared it. But Dana White made it official. McGregor was stepping back in, and not against some easy tune-up opponent picked to protect him. His opponent would be Max Holloway. These two men share history that stretches all the way back to 2013, back when they were both just hungry featherweight prospects trying to prove themselves. McGregor won that first meeting by decision, and Holloway went on to become one of the greatest featherweight champions the sport has ever seen, a warrior known for his insane cardio and his refusal to ever back down. Now, over a decade later, they were being brought back together, this time in a completely different division, this time with completely different stakes. Two legends. One rivalry reignited, and a fan base absolutely losing its mind over the possibility of seeing the notorious walk out to that cage one more time. So here's where we land. In one single stretch of days, Dana White managed to do what most promoters spend months trying to accomplish. He resurrected a sleeping giant of a fight city with not one, but two championship fights. He revealed a heartbreaking injury that ripped a promising matchup away before it could even be finalized. And he confirmed the long-awaited return of the sport's biggest superstar, stepping back in a competition after years away, against a familiar face from his past. Philadelphia is getting its moment. Two champions are getting tested. A fighter had his body betray him at the worst possible time. And the most electric personality combat sports has ever produced is finally coming home to the cage. The countdown has officially begun. And if the last few days are any indication of what's still to come, this summer of fighting is only just getting started.